Hello, everyone, and welcome back to King's Advisors. Last week, I said that the new Reacher episode was probably the worst one of the season, and yet it was still good enough for a 7 out of 10 for me. This week's episode of Reacher brought it all back. I tend to kind of multitask while I watch television, and if a show either makes me rewind because I missed something or actually makes me feel guilty about the multitasking, I tend to rate it higher. This week's episode did that. I was working on something during probably the first 6 minutes of the show, and I actually restarted the episode because I felt that I probably missed something. This, in my opinion, is a hallmark of good storytelling. There's a difference between answering a text message during a show and actually multitasking. And when the show can grab you back from the latter, it's really good. So I give this week's episode probably about an 8 out of 10, maybe plus or minus zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2. Now, before I go into my reaction, I want to thank everyone that's been watching these reviews. This show has really blown up the channel, and as fun as it is seeing numbers go up, reading y'all's comments is even better. So please keep them coming. And this week, comment below what y'all thought about the episode and whether you expected that big twist at the end. So now, without further ado, let's get into episode 6 of Reacher and let's get into the spoilers. So we start on a playground where the gang is trying to decide what brought down the building in the explosion from last week. There's more is he, isn't he when it comes to Swan, and it's really starting to look concerning for him. From here, the plan starts to unfold, and they decide to find Marlo, the woman from New Age, to figure out just what's going on and what she's hiding. So after some sleuthing, which admittedly does involve some rather silly dialogue, and Reacher getting some new clothes, they get to her where she's staying with her friend that's clearly a stereotype for an upper class gay man, which honestly was kind of funny. So after some back and forth between them, we finally get the truth. Swan is one of the good guys, and she actually brought him in to figure out what Langston and the rest of his security team were doing. If you've forgotten, Langston was a retired dirty cop who brought in a whole bunch of other dirty cops to be the rest of his security team. We find out that the little winged ships that New Age was producing were having more issues than normal, and that these apparently broken ships were actually being siphoned off to sell to AM, who, as we know, is on his way from New York. Now, just before this, we learned that the police captain that was yelling at Russo in, I believe, episode 4, is actually a dirty cop too, and that Langston had paid him off to keep him updated on Russo's investigation. So we've just got a whole bunch of dirty cops. Of course, we get another flashback scene to where that colonel that I actually thought was going to be the general that Reacher has this really big, like, father-son relationship with in some of the books is actually kind of a scumbag. At least I think he is. So what happens is he basically comes in and says that the colonel, which I think he is, so I think he's actually speaking in third person, which kind of makes it a little weird, is getting promoted. And he doesn't want this big drug mule operation being released or going public basically while he's getting promoted. So he tells him what's going to happen is you're going to file charges for 5 misdemeanors. 4 of them are getting probation. 1 of them's getting jail time, and they're all getting honorably discharged. And obviously, Reacher doesn't like that. So I do actually think that this isn't going to be the general that plays a big role in a couple of the early books. I think it's just a colonel covering his ass. It's probably the colonel that was in charge of the investigation unit or the investigations units, and he's not going to play a bigger role outside of this season. I think the main part of all this is to further explain the relationship between Reacher and the rest of his team so that this season doesn't feel like it's missing something, which honestly, I think they've done a pretty good job of so far. So Reacher and the gang show up to Russo's house and basically say, we need you to watch Marlo's daughter. We're going to go get Langston and kill everybody, and we need you to make sure she's safe. And he kind of goes, why me? Why do you suddenly trust me? And he says, I saw what you did to my friend's kid at the graveyard, and I know you can be trusted. Because if you remember, he jumps on top of the widow and the kid so that they're protected from any of the gunshots. So the rest of the episode is really just a bunch of action. It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma in the bus yard or the bus graveyard type thing. It's a whole bunch of trucks and buses that a bunch of people die in. And then there's a chase scene between Russo and some henchmen that are trying to get the daughter. So throughout this entire last, let's say 15, 20 minutes, Reacher kills a bunch of people and then he sends the rest of his team off to go get the girl, to go get Russo and the girl and to protect. Unfortunately, they are unable to do that. Russo dies in Neely's arms. We actually see Neely overcome her issue with touching people, and she actually holds his hand while he dies. And of course, just as Reacher is about to get Langston's friends in this helicopter show up to rescue him. So Langston lives, and Reacher and the gang are kind of on the down end now. You know, they've kind of been high at each end of every episode. They've been figuring something out, but they truly lost in this episode. They had an opportunity to get Langston to get away with everyone safe, and Russo dies, and Langston gets away. And of course, you know, we have AM on his way here to New York. At the beginning of the episode, he's actually killed a Pennsylvania police officer because she tries to issue him an official warning, which apparently warnings in Pennsylvania are now like official documents. I didn't know about that. Whether or not that's true, I don't really care. It's not one of those things that concerns me. I tend to nitpick things like that when the show itself already isn't good. Small things like that you can let get away when the show is actually doing a good job of telling the story, which, you know, Reacher is. So, of course, now we're sitting here. We are about 5 days away from the new episode, and I am really excited. You know, it's the penultimate episode. There's a lot riding on this episode. We've got to figure out what's going on with Swan. We've got to get close to the ending so that in the final episode we can actually have, I wouldn't necessarily say a happy ending, because we do know that, of course, Reacher's going to say goodbye and go back on his own. So the show's got to put him in a position where he's able to go back on his own after seeing all this stuff that his friends have. So I'm definitely going to be interested to see how they do that. I'm going to be interested to see how the show finishes, and I am kind of hoping we do actually get to see Reacher toss Langston out of a helicopter. I think that would be actually kind of funny. As always, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Twitter at King'sAdvisors_.